My name is Jessica Thompson, and for 3 years, my brother-in-law Michael made me believe I was nothing more than his personal assistant. He called me stupid. He called me a servant. He told me to know my place so many times that I almost forgot I had a place at all. But what Michael didn't realize while he was busy humiliating me in front of clients and family was that I was quietly building something he could never take away from me, my own power. The day I walked out of Thompson Associates wasn't just the day I quit my job. It was the day I took his entire business empire with me, one client at a time. And the best part? He never saw it coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 years ago, I thought I was being offered a lifeline. I was living in Sacramento, struggling to make ends meet after my divorce, working 2 part-time jobs just to cover rent on a tiny studio apartment that smelled like cigarettes from the previous tenant. My credit cards were maxed out, my car was making sounds that promised expensive repairs, and every month felt like I was drowning a little deeper in bills I couldn't quite manage to pay on time. That's when my sister Lisa called with what seemed like the perfect solution. Her husband Michael owned a marketing company in Riverside, about an hour south of where I was living. They had just bought this beautiful house in the hills, complete with a pool and a 3-car garage, and Lisa was overwhelmed trying to manage their 2 young kids while Michael built his business empire. She needed help, and Michael's company needed an administrative assistant. It felt like fate. "You'd be perfect for this, Jess," Lisa had said over the phone, her voice bright with excitement. "Michael says he can start you at $40,000 a year, which I know isn't huge, but it's steady. And you could move closer to us. The kids miss their Aunt Jessica, and honestly, I could really use the support. You know how demanding Michael's work is." I did know. Michael had always been intense about his career, even back when he and Lisa were dating in college. He was the kind of man who wore expensive suits and talked about quarterly projections at family barbecues. He drove a BMW and carried himself like someone who expected the world to rearrange itself around his schedule. But he was successful, and success had always impressed me more than it probably should have. The job offer felt like salvation. $40,000 a year was more than I was making with both my part-time positions combined, and the idea of being close to family again, of having some stability in my life, was almost too good to be true. I said yes before Lisa had even finished explaining the benefits package. Moving to Riverside felt like starting over in the best possible way. I found a small studio apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but clean and affordable, with enough space for my few belongings and a view of the mountains on clear days. The apartment complex had a tiny pool and laundry facilities, and my neighbors were quiet, working people who nodded politely when we passed in the hallways. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without calculating whether I had enough money for groceries and gas. Thompson Associates occupied the entire 3rd floor of a modern glass building in Riverside's business district. The office was impressive in an understated way, with sleek furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and that new carpet smell that suggested success and growth. Michael had built something substantial here, and I was genuinely proud to be part of it, even in a small way. My first day, Michael gave me a tour of the facilities with the kind of professional enthusiasm that made me feel welcomed and valued. He introduced me to the team, about 25 people spread across different departments, and everyone seemed friendly enough. There was David Chen, Michael's business partner, who handled the creative side while Michael focused on client relations and business development. David was quieter than Michael, more thoughtful in his responses, and he had this way of really listening when people spoke that I found refreshing. Michael explained my role with the same confidence he brought to everything else. I would be handling administrative tasks, managing his calendar, coordinating meetings, and providing general support to keep the office running smoothly. It seemed straightforward enough, and I was grateful to have clear expectations and a boss who seemed to value organization and efficiency. The first few weeks were everything I had hoped they would be. I arrived early each morning, coffee in hand, ready to tackle whatever the day might bring. I organized Michael's chaotic filing system, streamlined the appointment scheduling process, and created detailed spreadsheets to track project timelines and client communications. I answered phones with a smile in my voice, greeted visitors warmly, and made sure the office always looked professional and welcoming. Michael seemed pleased with my work, often commenting on how much more organized everything had become since my arrival. He would stop by my desk to thank me for handling difficult clients or managing complex scheduling conflicts, and I felt valued in a way I hadn't experienced in years. This was what I had been looking for: stability, purpose, and the satisfaction of being genuinely good at something that mattered. Lisa was thrilled to have me nearby. We started having regular sister dinners, either at her house or at one of Riverside's family restaurants, where we would catch up on each other's lives and make plans for weekend activities with the kids. Her children, Emma and Jake, were 8 and 6, full of energy and affection for their aunt who had suddenly become a regular presence in their lives. I would pick them up from school when Lisa had appointments, help with homework at the kitchen table, and listen to their elaborate stories about playground dramas and favorite TV shows. Being part of a family again felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Sunday dinners at Lisa and Michael's house became a weekly tradition, and I found myself looking forward to those relaxed evenings around their dining room table, sharing stories about work and planning upcoming family events. Michael would talk about his latest business successes, Lisa would update us on the kids' activities and school events, and I would contribute my own observations about office life and the interesting people I was meeting through work. For the first time since my divorce, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I had a job that challenged me, family nearby who cared about me, and a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life for too long. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was building something stable and meaningful, and I was proud of the progress I was making both personally and professionally. The work itself was more interesting than I had expected. While my official title was administrative assistant, I quickly discovered that Michael needed more comprehensive support than basic scheduling and filing. Clients would call with questions about their marketing campaigns, and I found myself researching their industries, analyzing their target demographics, and providing detailed information that helped them make strategic decisions. I started reading marketing blogs in my spare time, studying successful campaigns, and developing my own theories about what made certain approaches more effective than others. Michael began asking for my input on various projects, initially in an informal way, that made me feel like a valued team member. He would stop by my desk with a client brief and ask what I thought about their objectives. Or he would invite me to sit in on planning meetings where I could take notes and offer occasional observations. I felt like I was learning and growing in ways that extended far beyond my job description, and I was grateful for the opportunity to expand my skills and knowledge. The clients seemed to appreciate my attention to detail and my genuine interest in their success. Mrs. Patricia Williams, who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios, often asked to speak with me directly when she called, saying she trusted my ability to understand her needs and communicate them clearly to the creative team. Mr. Rodriguez, who ran a family restaurant group, would joke that I knew his business almost as well as he did, thanks to the thorough research I conducted before each of our strategy sessions. I started keeping detailed notes about each client's preferences, challenges, and goals, creating comprehensive files that helped the entire team provide more personalized and effective service. These files became invaluable resources for project planning and client communication, and I took pride in the fact that my organizational systems were making everyone's job easier and more productive. David Chen often complimented my work, particularly my ability to anticipate client needs and prepare detailed background information for meetings. He had a way of acknowledging my contributions that made me feel seen and appreciated, and I began to look forward to our collaborative sessions where we would brainstorm creative solutions for challenging client requests. Unlike Michael, who was always rushing between meetings and phone calls, David took time to really listen to my ideas and consider how they might be implemented. The months passed quickly, filled with the comfortable rhythm of meaningful work and family connections. I was learning something new every day, contributing to projects that had real impact on client success, and building relationships with colleagues who seemed to value my input and perspective. My financial situation had stabilized completely, and I was even able to start saving a little money each month, something that had seemed impossible during my struggling years in Sacramento. Lisa and I grew closer than we had been since childhood, bonding over shared responsibilities and family experiences. She would often thank me for being such a reliable presence in her children's lives, and I treasured the role I was playing in their development and happiness. Emma had started asking me to help with her school projects, and Jake would save his best jokes to tell me during our weekend adventures to local parks and museums. Michael's business continued to grow, and I felt proud to be part of that success. New clients were joining the roster regularly. Existing clients were expanding their contracts, and the office atmosphere was energetic and optimistic. I had found my place in this thriving environment, and I was confident that my hard work and dedication were contributing to the company's continued growth and reputation for excellence. Everything felt perfect, stable, and full of promise for the future. I had rebuilt my life in ways that exceeded my most optimistic expectations, and I was genuinely happy with the choices I had made and the path I was following. This was what success looked like: meaningful work, loving family relationships, financial security, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. But success, I was about to learn, can be fragile when it depends on other people's recognition of your worth. And some people, no matter how much you give them, will always see you as less than you are. The foundation I thought I had built was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined, and the person I trusted most to protect my place in this new life was about to become the greatest threat to everything I had worked so hard to create. The shift started so gradually that I almost didn't notice it happening. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when things began to change. But at the time, each incident felt like an isolated misunderstanding rather than part of a larger pattern. It was like watching the sun set. You don't notice the sky getting darker until suddenly you realize you're sitting in shadows. The first crack appeared during my 4th month at Thompson Associates. I had been working on a comprehensive market analysis for Patterson Electronics, one of our mid-tier clients who manufactured components for smart home devices. The project required extensive research into emerging technologies, consumer adoption, patterns, and competitive positioning strategies. I spent weeks diving deep into industry reports, conducting phone interviews with potential customers, and creating detailed charts that mapped out market opportunities and potential challenges. When I presented my findings to Michael, his response was enthusiastic. He praised the thoroughness of my research, complimented my analytical approach, and told me the work was exactly what Patterson needed to make informed decisions about their product development timeline. I felt proud and validated, confident that I was contributing real value to our client relationships and proving myself worthy of increased responsibilities. The presentation to Patterson Electronics was scheduled for the following Thursday afternoon. I prepared detailed handouts, created a slide deck that highlighted key insights, and rehearsed my talking points until I could deliver them with confidence and clarity. This felt like a significant moment in my professional development, an opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities directly to clients and establish myself as a strategic thinker rather than just an administrative support person. But when Thursday arrived, Michael informed me that he would be handling the presentation alone. He explained that Patterson's executives were old-school business people who preferred working with senior leadership, and he felt it would be more appropriate for him to deliver the findings personally. He assured me that my research was excellent and that he would make sure to credit my contributions during the meeting. I felt disappointed, but tried to understand his reasoning. Client relationships were delicate, and Michael had years of experience managing executive-level communications. Perhaps he was right that my presence might seem presumptuous or unprofessional. I helped him prepare for the presentation, briefing him on the nuances of my research and ensuring he had answers ready for potential questions. Later that afternoon, I overheard Michael on a phone call with David, debriefing about the Patterson meeting. He spoke enthusiastically about the client's positive response to his market analysis and his strategic recommendations. There was no mention of my research, no acknowledgement of the weeks I had spent developing the insights he had just presented as his own work. When David asked about the methodology behind some of the findings, Michael claimed he had developed the analytical framework himself. Standing outside his office, listening to him take full credit for my efforts, I felt a strange mixture of hurt and confusion. Perhaps this was normal in business settings. Perhaps my role was to support Michael's client relationships rather than seek individual recognition. I told myself that what mattered was the quality of the work and the client's satisfaction, not who received the credit. But the pattern continued. A few weeks later, I developed a social media strategy for Riverside Community Bank that focused on financial literacy education for young adults. The campaign concept was based on research showing that traditional banking marketing failed to resonate with customers under 30, who valued transparency, education, and social responsibility over conventional financial messaging. I created detailed content calendars, drafted sample posts, and outlined metrics for measuring engagement and conversion rates. Again, Michael praised my work privately and then presented it to the client as his own innovation. During the strategy meeting, which I attended as a note-taker, he described the campaign as something he had conceptualized based on current market trends and spoke about his approach to millennial marketing. When the bank's marketing director asked about specific implementation details, Michael gestured vaguely in my direction and said I would handle the administrative aspects of executing his strategy. The meeting was successful, and the client approved the campaign enthusiastically. But sitting in that conference room, watching Michael accept praise for ideas that had originated from my research and creativity, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. This wasn't collaborative work where credit was shared among team members. This was something else entirely. At family dinners, Michael would regale Lisa with stories about his latest business triumphs, describing successful campaigns, and satisfied clients without ever mentioning the team members who had contributed to those successes. He spoke about solving complex marketing challenges and developing innovative strategies as if he worked in isolation, a creative genius generating brilliant ideas through pure individual effort. Lisa would listen with admiration, praising Michael's business acumen and celebrating his professional achievements. She was proud of her husband's success, and I understood her desire to support and encourage him. But hearing him describe projects I had worked on extensively without any acknowledgement of my contributions felt increasingly uncomfortable. The office dynamics began shifting in subtle ways that were difficult to identify but impossible to ignore. During team meetings, Michael would interrupt me when I offered suggestions or observations, often dismissing my input with phrases like, "Let's stay focused on practical solutions," or "We need to consider the bigger picture here." When I raised questions about project timelines or resource allocation, he would redirect the conversation to other team members, implying that my concerns were less relevant or sophisticated than those raised by my colleagues. Other staff members seemed to take cues from Michael's behavior. Conversations would pause when I approached, not out of deliberate rudeness but with the subtle awkwardness that suggested I wasn't quite considered part of the inner circle. Ideas I contributed during brainstorming sessions would be politely acknowledged and then quickly moved past, while similar suggestions from other team members would generate extended discussion and development. David Chen was the exception to this pattern. He continued to seek my input on creative projects, ask thoughtful questions about my research findings, and treat my contributions with the same respect he showed other team members. During collaborative work sessions, he would specifically ask for my perspective and build on my ideas in ways that felt genuinely collaborative. But David's respectful treatment only highlighted how differently Michael was beginning to interact with me. The workload expectations also started changing in ways that felt significant, but were difficult to quantify. Michael began assigning me tasks that extended well beyond my job description, but he framed these additional responsibilities as professional development opportunities rather than extra work. I was asked to coordinate client events, manage vendor relationships, conduct preliminary research for new business proposals, and handle increasingly complex administrative tasks that required specialized knowledge and significant time investment. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the expanding scope of my responsibilities, Michael's response was to praise my capabilities and express confidence in my ability to handle multiple priorities effectively. He spoke about my growth potential and suggested that taking on additional challenges would help me develop valuable skills for future career advancement. His framing made it difficult to object without seeming ungrateful or uncommitted to professional excellence. The compensation for these additional responsibilities never materialized, despite Michael's vague promises about reviewing my position and recognizing outstanding performance during future evaluation periods. When I raised questions about salary adjustments or title changes that might reflect my expanded role, Michael would acknowledge my contributions while explaining that budget constraints and company policies made immediate changes impossible. Meanwhile, I noticed that other employees who took on additional responsibilities often received formal recognition, compensation adjustments, or promotional opportunities. Sarah Martinez, who had been hired as a junior graphic designer, was promoted to senior designer after 6 months and received a corresponding salary increase. Tom Bradley, who joined the sales team around the same time I started, was given the title of account executive along with commission opportunities that significantly increased his earning potential. My own professional development seemed to exist in a different category, one where increased responsibilities were balanced by expressions of gratitude rather than concrete advancement opportunities. Michael would thank me for my flexibility and dedication, emphasize how much he valued my contributions, and assure me that my efforts were noticed and appreciated. But appreciation, I was beginning to realize, was not the same as advancement. The social dynamics within the office also reflected this growing disparity. Other team members were invited to client dinners, industry networking events, and professional development conferences that could enhance their careers and expand their professional networks. I was occasionally asked to coordinate these events or handle logistical arrangements, but I was rarely included as a participant. When I asked about attending a local marketing conference that seemed relevant to my work, Michael explained that the company's professional development budget was limited and needed to be allocated strategically to employees whose roles had direct client interaction responsibilities. Since my position was primarily administrative, he felt the conference wouldn't provide sufficient value to justify the expense. But I knew that my role involved extensive client interaction, from managing communication preferences to conducting research that directly informed strategic recommendations. The distinction Michael was making between my work and other team members' responsibilities felt arbitrary and unfair, but challenging his assessment seemed risky and potentially career-limiting. During this period, Lisa began making comments that suggested she viewed my role at Thompson Associates differently than I understood it myself. She would refer to my work as helping Michael with his business, rather than having my own professional responsibilities and career trajectory. When I mentioned feeling frustrated by certain workplace dynamics, she would remind me how fortunate I was to have a stable job with family, and suggest that I should focus on being grateful rather than critical. Her perspective wasn't malicious, but it reflected a fundamental misunderstanding about my professional identity and career aspirations. To Lisa, my job seemed like an extension of family support rather than independent professional achievement. This framing made it difficult to discuss my concerns about recognition, advancement, or workplace equity without seeming selfish or ungrateful for Michael's initial job offer. The accumulation of these patterns created a growing sense of professional isolation that was difficult to articulate or address directly. Each individual incident seemed minor and potentially explainable, but together, they formed a picture of systematic marginalization that was affecting my confidence and motivation. I began questioning whether my perceptions were accurate or whether I was being overly sensitive about normal workplace dynamics. Michael's behavior toward me remained generally positive and appreciative, which made my growing discomfort feel confusing and possibly unjustified. He continued to praise my work quality, express gratitude for my contributions, and treat me with personal warmth during family interactions. The disconnect between his private appreciation and public diminishment of my role created cognitive dissonance that was emotionally exhausting. I started working longer hours and putting extra effort into every project, hoping that exceptional performance might earn me the recognition and advancement opportunities that seemed to come naturally. To my colleagues, I volunteered for additional responsibilities, stayed late to ensure perfect deliverables, and approached every task with meticulous attention to detail that went far beyond basic job requirements. But increased effort seemed to generate increased expectations rather than increased recognition. The higher the quality of my work, the more Michael seemed to take that quality for granted. Excellence became the baseline expectation rather than grounds for advancement, and my contributions were absorbed into the general operation of the business without specific acknowledgement or reward. The realization that hard work alone wasn't sufficient to change my professional trajectory was both disappointing and illuminating. I had always believed that merit would be recognized and rewarded, that dedication and competence would naturally lead to advancement and increased responsibility. But I was learning that workplace dynamics involved factors beyond individual performance, including politics, perception, and personal relationships that could override objective measures of contribution and value. The first time Michael called me a servant, I convinced myself I had misheard him. It happened during a client meeting with Westfield Manufacturing, a family-owned company that produced custom furniture for high-end restaurants and hotels. I had spent considerable time researching their industry, analyzing their competitors, and developing marketing strategies that could help them expand their client base beyond the regional market they currently served. The meeting was held in our main conference room, with Westfield's owner, Mr. James Morrison, and his daughter Sarah, who handled their marketing efforts. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation that outlined opportunities for digital marketing, expansion, trade show participation, and partnership development with interior design firms. The research behind these recommendations represented weeks of work, including phone interviews with industry professionals and detailed analysis of successful marketing campaigns by similar companies. Michael introduced the meeting by positioning himself as the primary strategic consultant who would be guiding Westfield through their expansion planning process. He described me as his administrative assistant who would be taking notes and handling follow-up logistics. This introduction felt diminishing given my extensive preparation and research contributions, but I assumed he was establishing clear roles for client communication purposes. As the presentation progressed, Mr. Morrison asked several detailed questions about digital marketing metrics and trade show ROI calculations. These were areas where my research was particularly strong, and I had prepared specific data and examples that directly addressed his concerns. When I began to respond with the relevant information, Michael interrupted me mid-sentence. "Jessica, please focus on note-taking," he said firmly. "Mr. Morrison is asking strategic questions that require higher-level analysis." He then turned to the client with an apologetic smile. "Sometimes I forget that servants need to stay in their lane when business strategy is being discussed." The word hit me like a physical blow. Servant. Not assistant, not team member, not colleague. Servant. The casual way he delivered it, as if it were simply an accurate description of my role rather than a deliberately humiliating characterization, made the statement even more jarring. Mr. Morrison looked uncomfortable, his daughter shifted in her chair, and the energy in the room became tense and awkward. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger, but I remained silent. Challenging Michael in front of clients seemed unprofessional and potentially damaging to both the meeting and my job security. I focused on taking detailed notes while Michael attempted to answer Mr. Morrison's questions using information from my research, though his responses lacked the depth and specificity that I could have provided. After the meeting, Michael acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He thanked me for my preparation work, complimented my note-taking, and discussed follow-up actions with the same professional demeanor he always maintained. His casual dismissal of the incident was almost more disturbing than the original comment, suggesting that he saw nothing problematic about publicly characterizing me as a servant. I spent the rest of that day replaying the interaction, trying to understand whether I was overreacting to what might have been an unfortunate choice of words rather than a deliberate insult. Perhaps Michael had been nervous about the meeting and had spoken carelessly without considering how his words might sound. Perhaps he hadn't intended to diminish me in front of clients, but had simply been trying to maintain control of the presentation flow. But the more I analyzed the incident, the more intentional it seemed. Michael had interrupted me specifically when I was providing valuable information that demonstrated my expertise and preparation. His characterization of me as a servant had effectively shut down my participation in the strategic discussion and reinforced his position as the sole authority on business matters. The timing and context suggested deliberate marginalization rather than accidental rudeness. Over the following weeks, I became more aware of how Michael described my role to clients and colleagues. He consistently framed my contributions as administrative support rather than strategic input, even when my work involved complex analysis and creative problem-solving. During team meetings, he would refer to my research as background information, and my recommendations as preliminary thoughts that required his review and refinement. The language he used created a hierarchy that positioned him as the intellectual authority, while reducing me to a support function. Ideas that originated from my research became insights we developed, or strategies our team created, with no specific acknowledgement of my individual contributions. When clients praised particular aspects of our work, Michael would accept the compliments personally, rather than directing recognition to the team members who had actually developed those elements. The second incident occurred about 6 weeks later during a family dinner at Lisa and Michael's house. It was a Sunday evening in late fall, and Lisa had prepared an elaborate meal to celebrate Michael's recent success in landing Patterson Electronics as a long-term client. The contract represented a significant milestone for Thompson Associates, and Lisa wanted to recognize Michael's achievement with a special family celebration. During dinner, Michael recounted the story of how he had secured the Patterson contract, describing his strategic approach to client development and his innovative presentation techniques. He spoke about overcoming initial client resistance and developing customized solutions that had convinced Patterson to choose Thompson Associates over several larger competitors. I listened to his narrative knowing that the Patterson success had been built primarily on research and strategic recommendations I had developed. The market analysis that had impressed Patterson's executives, the competitive positioning strategies that had differentiated our proposal, and the implementation timeline that had addressed their specific concerns had all originated from my work. Michael's role had been important in client relationship management and contract negotiation, but the strategic foundation of the proposal had been my contribution. As Michael continued his story, he mentioned the challenges of managing his administrative staff during the Patterson project. He described having to educate support personnel about client expectations and ensure that basic research tasks were completed accurately and on time. His characterization of my work as basic research tasks felt reductive and dismissive, but I remained silent, not wanting to create conflict during what was meant to be a celebration. Later in the evening, Lisa asked Michael about his plans for expanding the business and taking on larger clients like Patterson. She was curious about his strategic vision and wanted to understand how he intended to grow Thompson Associates into a more prominent regional marketing firm. Michael's response involved considerable detail about market opportunities, competitive advantages, and operational scaling challenges. As he spoke, I found myself mentally noting several important considerations he was overlooking, including resource allocation issues, staff development needs, and client retention strategies that would be crucial for sustainable growth. When Michael paused in his explanation, I offered what I thought was a helpful observation about the importance of developing systems for maintaining service quality during rapid expansion. I suggested that successful scaling would require careful attention to project management processes and client communication protocols, based on patterns I had observed during our recent growth period. Michael's response was swift and cutting. "Jess, stick to clearing plates," he said with a dismissive laugh. "Business strategy isn't for servants. Leave the thinking to people who actually understand it." The comment was delivered with the same casual confidence as his earlier servant reference, but this time it occurred in front of family rather than clients. Lisa looked uncomfortable, but didn't challenge Michael's characterization of me. The children continued eating, unaware of the tension that had suddenly filled the room. I felt humiliated and angry, but also confused about how to respond appropriately. The word servant had appeared again, this time coupled with the explicit instruction to avoid thinking about business matters. Michael wasn't just minimizing my contributions. He was actively discouraging my intellectual engagement with the work I was doing every day. The message was clear. My role was to perform assigned tasks without questioning or contributing to strategic discussions. After dinner, I helped Lisa clear the table and load the dishwasher, going through the familiar motions of family cleanup while my mind raced with anger and confusion. Lisa seemed to sense my distress, but didn't address Michael's comments directly. Instead, she made general conversation about the children's school activities and upcoming holiday plans, avoiding any reference to the uncomfortable moment that had occurred during dinner. When I finally left their house that evening, I felt emotionally drained and professionally demoralized. The family dinner had been intended as a celebration of business success that I had helped create, but instead, it had become another opportunity for Michael to diminish my contributions and reinforce my subordinate status. The pattern was becoming undeniable and increasingly difficult to rationalize as misunderstanding or poor communication. The third incident, the one that finally shattered my ability to make excuses for Michael's behavior, occurred during a crucial phone call with Mrs. Patricia Williams, who owned Pacific Fitness Studios. Mrs. Williams was one of our most important clients, and she had called to discuss expanding her marketing budget for the upcoming New Year fitness campaign season. I had been managing the Pacific Fitness account for several months, conducting detailed analysis of their customer demographics, developing targeted social media strategies, and coordinating with their local managers to ensure marketing campaigns aligned with individual studio offerings. Mrs. Williams had consistently praised my work and often requested to speak with me directly when she had questions or concerns about her marketing strategies. The call was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, and I had prepared extensively by analyzing her previous campaign performance, researching seasonal fitness marketing trends, and developing recommendations for budget allocation across different marketing channels. Mrs. Williams was considering doubling her marketing investment for the New Year period, which would represent a significant revenue increase for Thompson Associates. Michael decided to join the call, positioning himself as the senior strategist who would be guiding the expansion planning process. As the conversation progressed, Mrs. Williams asked specific questions about demographic targeting and ROI projections for different marketing channels. These were areas where my research was particularly detailed and current, and I began providing the specific data and analysis she was requesting. Mrs. Williams seemed pleased with the information I was sharing and asked follow-up questions that demonstrated her confidence in my expertise and recommendations. She specifically mentioned appreciating my thorough understanding of her business needs and my ability to provide actionable insights rather than generic marketing advice. As I was explaining the potential impact of increased Instagram advertising, during peak enrollment periods, Michael abruptly interrupted me. "Can the servant please stop talking?" he said sharply. "Mrs. Williams doesn't need to hear from the help. Know your place, stupid." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Mrs. Williams went completely silent on the other end of the line. I felt as if I had been slapped across the face in front of someone whose professional respect I had worked months to earn. The casual cruelty of Michael's statement, delivered in front of a client who valued my contributions, was breathtaking in its unprofessionalism and deliberate humiliation. After several seconds of uncomfortable silence, Mrs. Williams cleared her throat and said, "Actually, Michael, I specifically requested this call because I value Jessica's insights and expertise. She understands my business better than anyone else I've worked with, and I trust her recommendations completely." Michael's attempt to recover from the situation was clumsy and unconvincing. He laughed awkwardly and claimed he had been joking, suggesting that Mrs. Williams had misunderstood his playful management style. But the damage was done. The respect and professionalism that should have characterized a client relationship had been shattered by his need to assert dominance over me in the most degrading way possible. Mrs. Williams ended the call shortly, afterward, saying she needed to review her options and would contact us again soon. Her tone was cool and professional, but I could hear the disappointment and discomfort in her voice. A client relationship that had been building successfully for months had been damaged, possibly irreparably, by Michael's inability to treat me with basic human respect. After the call ended, Michael seemed genuinely surprised by Mrs. Williams's reaction. He appeared to believe that his characterization of me as a servant and his instruction for me to know my place were acceptable management techniques that clients would understand and accept. His lack of awareness about how his behavior reflected on the company was almost as disturbing as the behavior itself. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment staring at the wall and trying to process what had happened. 3 times now, Michael had publicly called me a servant. 3 times, he had deliberately humiliated me in front of other people. The pattern was undeniable, and the escalation was obvious. From calling me a servant in front of clients, to dismissing my strategic thinking at family dinner, to openly calling me stupid in front of our most important client. The realization that this was intentional, systematic devaluation rather than poor communication or management inexperience was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it meant I wasn't imagining or misinterpreting his behavior. Terrifying because it meant I was working for someone who saw me as fundamentally less than human, someone who believed he had the right to humiliate me publicly whenever he felt the need to assert his authority. I had spent months making excuses for Michael's behavior, rationalizing his treatment of me as the result of stress, poor communication, or business pressures. But there was no excuse for calling an employee stupid in front of clients. There was no justification for systematically undermining someone's professional credibility while benefiting from their work and expertise. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being Michael's servant. I was done accepting humiliation as the price of employment. I was done pretending that my contributions didn't matter and that my professional dignity was expendable. Michael had given me what he truly deserved, a clear understanding of exactly who he was and exactly what he thought of me. Now it was time to give him what he truly deserved in return. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in my small bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Michael's words over and over until they burned themselves into my memory with perfect, painful clarity. "Can the servant please stop talking? Mrs. Williams doesn't need to hear from the help. Know your place, stupid. The casual cruelty of it, the deliberate humiliation in front of a client who respected my work, the absolute certainty in his voice that he had the right to speak to me that way. I kept thinking about Mrs. Williams. Silence on the phone. The long pause that spoke volumes about her shock and discomfort. This was a successful businesswoman who had specifically requested my input, who had praised my strategic thinking, who had built her trust in Thompson Associates largely based on her confidence in my capabilities. And Michael had destroyed that professional relationship in a single moment of petty dominance. The word stupid echoed in my mind with particular viciousness. I have a business degree from UC Davis. I graduated summa cum laude. I had rebuilt my entire life after a devastating divorce, moved to a new city, and quickly become indispensable to a growing marketing firm. I was managing complex client relationships, conducting sophisticated market research, and developing strategic recommendations that directly contributed to company growth and client satisfaction. But to Michael, I was stupid, a servant who should know her place. As the hours passed, my hurt began transforming into something harder and more focused. Anger, yes, but also clarity. For months, I had been making excuses for Michael's behavior, convincing myself that his treatment of me was somehow my fault or my misunderstanding. I had told myself that workplace hierarchies naturally involved some degree of diminishment, that administrative roles inevitably came with limited recognition, that I should be grateful for steady employment and family proximity. But lying there, in the dark, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the truth I had been avoiding. Michael's behavior wasn't normal workplace dynamics. It wasn't poor communication or management inexperience. It was deliberate, systematic abuse designed to keep me in a subordinate position while he benefited from my work and expertise. He was stealing my contributions, taking credit for my ideas, and ensuring that I remained invisible and voiceless in professional settings. The pattern was clear now that I stopped making excuses for it. Every successful project I had worked on became Michael's achievement in client communications and team meetings. Every strategic insight I developed was presented as evidence of his analytical capabilities. Every client relationship I had carefully built was treated as his personal network. I was producing significant value for Thompson Associates, but that value was being systematically attributed to Michael, while I remained an unnamed, unrecognized support function. I thought about all the times I had stayed late to perfect presentations that Michael would deliver as his own work. All the weekends I had spent researching industry trends and competitive analysis that would be presented as his insights. All the client calls where I had provided detailed, thoughtful responses to complex questions, while Michael took notes and later claimed credit for the solutions I had developed in real time. The financial implications became painfully obvious as I calculated the value I was generating versus the compensation I was receiving. My research had directly contributed to landing the Patterson Electronics contract, which represented over $200,000 in annual revenue for Thompson Associates. My strategies had helped expand several existing client relationships, generating additional project fees and long-term retainer agreements. My work was creating substantial financial returns for the company, but my salary hadn't increased a single dollar since I was hired. Meanwhile, other employees who generated far less measurable value were receiving promotions, salary increases, and professional development opportunities. Sarah Martinez had been promoted to senior designer based on creative work that was good but not exceptional. Tom Bradley had become an account executive and received commission opportunities despite being responsible for smaller, less complex client relationships than those I managed daily. The disparity wasn't based on performance or contribution. It was based on Michael's perception of who deserved recognition and advancement. And his perception was clearly influenced by factors that had nothing to do with professional competence or business value. I started thinking about Mrs. Williams and how she had specifically praised my understanding of her business needs. She, had told me repeatedly that I was the most insightful marketing consultant she had worked with. Someone who really listened to her concerns and developed solutions that addressed her specific challenges, rather than offering generic advice. Other clients had made similar comments, appreciating my attention to detail, my thorough preparation, and my ability to anticipate their needs and provide proactive support. But Michael seemed to believe that client relationships belonged to him by virtue of his title and ownership status, regardless of who actually did the work to build and maintain those relationships. He treated my client interactions as administrative tasks rather than professional expertise, even when clients clearly preferred working with me and trusted my recommendations more than his. The realization that I had been systematically devalued and exploited was accompanied by a growing awareness of my actual position in the marketplace. I wasn't just an administrative assistant who happened to be good at research and client communication. I was a skilled marketing professional with demonstrated expertise in strategic analysis, campaign development, and client relationship management. My work product was consistently high quality, my client feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and my contributions were directly measurable in terms of business results. Michael's characterization of me as a servant wasn't just personally insulting, it was professionally inaccurate. I was performing senior-level marketing work while being compensated and credited at an entry-level administrative scale. The gap between my actual contributions and my official recognition was enormous, and it had been growing wider with each successful project I completed. I began thinking about David Chen and how differently he treated my ideas and contributions. During collaborative work sessions, David would ask thoughtful questions about my research methodology, build on my strategic recommendations, and credit my insights when presenting concepts to clients. He recognized that good ideas could come from anyone on the team, and that collaboration worked best when everyone's expertise was acknowledged and utilized effectively. The contrast between David's respectful, professional approach and Michael's deliberate diminishment was stark and illuminating. David saw me as a competent colleague whose input added value to our shared projects. Michael saw me as a threat, to be neutralized, someone whose capabilities needed to be minimized to maintain his position as the sole strategic authority within the company. This difference in perception wasn't based on their relative experience or seniority within the company. Both Michael and David were successful marketing professionals with similar educational backgrounds and career trajectories. The difference was in their confidence and leadership philosophy. David was secure enough in his own abilities to recognize and utilize other people's strengths. Michael was insecure enough that he felt threatened by anyone who might challenge his intellectual dominance. As the night wore on, I found myself thinking about my sister Lisa and her role in this dynamic. She had been present when Michael called me a servant at their family dinner, dismissing my strategic thinking and telling me to stick to clearing plates. Her response had been uncomfortable silence, rather than any defense of my intelligence or professional capabilities. Lisa loved me and wanted the best for me, but she had also been conditioned to see Michael's success as the family's success and to avoid any conflict that might threaten their financial stability or social status. Challenging Michael's treatment of me would require her to acknowledge that her husband was capable of deliberate cruelty, something that would complicate her own marriage and family dynamics. But her silence had consequences for me. When family members fail to challenge abusive behavior, they become complicit in that abuse through their passivity. Lisa's unwillingness to defend me sent a clear message to Michael that his treatment of me was acceptable within our family system, that there would be no social or personal consequences for his professional bullying. I thought about Emma and Jake, Lisa's children, and what they were learning about workplace dynamics and family relationships by observing Michael's behavior toward me. They were seeing their father treat their aunt with disrespect and dismissal while their mother remained silent. They were learning that some people's feelings and dignity matter less than others, that success gives people the right to humiliate those they perceive as subordinate. The modeling of these dynamics within our family system was creating patterns that would influence how Emma and Jake understood power, respect, and professional relationships throughout their lives. Michael wasn't just hurting me, he was teaching the next generation that workplace abuse was normal and acceptable as long as it was directed toward someone with less official authority. This realization added another layer to my growing anger. I wasn't just fighting for my own professional dignity. I was fighting against the normalization of workplace abuse that was being demonstrated to children I loved. My response to Michael's behavior would send its own message about self-respect, boundaries, and the consequences of treating people with deliberate cruelty. As dawn approached, I felt something shift inside me that was deeper and more permanent than anger or hurt feelings. It was a fundamental change in how I saw myself and my situation. For months, I had been operating from a position of gratitude and accommodation, trying to prove my worth through exceptional performance and uncomplaining acceptance of whatever treatment I received. But exceptional performance hadn't earned me recognition or respect. Uncomplaining acceptance had only encouraged escalating abuse. Gratitude for employment opportunities had been interpreted as permission for exploitation. My strategy of working harder and accepting less had failed completely, and continuing that approach would only result in further degradation of my professional standing and personal dignity. The woman who had moved to Riverside seeking family connection and career stability was gone. She had been systematically destroyed by someone who saw her loyalty and capabilities as weaknesses to be exploited, rather than strengths to be valued. The woman who remained was harder, clearer, and absolutely unwilling to accept humiliation as the price of employment. I got up from bed and walked to my small desk, where I kept the detailed files I had been maintaining on every project I had worked on since joining Thompson Associates. These files contained copies of my research, documentation of my strategic recommendations, records of client feedback, and evidence of my contributions to every successful campaign and business development effort. I had been keeping these records initially as a professional development tool, hoping they would be useful during performance reviews or when requesting salary increases. But as I looked through the comprehensive documentation I had accumulated, I realized these files represented something much more powerful than a request for recognition. They were proof of my actual value in the marketplace and evidence of systematic credit theft by someone who had consistently underestimated my intelligence and preparation. Michael thought I was a stupid servant who didn't understand business strategy. He was about to discover just how much this servant had learned about his business, his clients, and his vulnerabilities. He had given me access to every aspect of Thompson Associates operations while treating me as if I were invisible and intellectually irrelevant. That invisibility, I was beginning to realize, had been a gift. While Michael was busy taking credit for my work and diminishing my contributions, I had been quietly documenting everything and building relationships that he didn't even know existed. I had been learning, growing, and preparing for a future that extended far beyond my current role, even when I didn't realize that's what I was doing. The storm inside me was settling into something calmer, but infinitely more dangerous. Michael wanted to treat me like a servant? Perfect. Servants, after all, have access to information that their masters never imagine they understand. They see everything, hear everything, and remember everything. And sometimes, when they've been pushed far enough, they use that knowledge in ways that masters never see coming. Michael had taught me exactly who he was and exactly what he thought of me. Now it was time for him to learn exactly who I was and exactly what I was capable of when someone made the mistake of underestimating me. The stupid servant was about to give him a lesson in strategic thinking that he would never forget. I called in sick the next morning. For the first time since starting at Thompson Associates, I needed time away from that office to think clearly about my situation and plan my next steps. I told Michael I had caught some kind of stomach bug and would probably need a day or two to recover fully. He expressed perfunctory concern about my health, and assured me that the office would manage fine without me for a few days. His casual dismissal of my absence only reinforced what I already knew. He saw me as easily replaceable administrative support rather than someone whose work was integral to daily operations. But I wasn't planning to spend my sick day recovering from an illness. I was planning to recover my power. I spent the morning at my kitchen table with my laptop, a cup of coffee, and every file I had accumulated during my time at Thompson Associates. The documentation I had been keeping was far more comprehensive than I had realized. Email threads showing my original strategic recommendations, client feedback praising specific insights I had provided, research reports with my analysis and conclusions, project timelines showing my actual role in campaign development versus how that work had been presented to clients. Looking through these materials with fresh eyes, I could see a clear pattern of intellectual property theft. Ideas I had developed were being systematically rebranded as Michael's innovations. Research I had conducted was being presented as evidence of his analytical capabilities. Strategic frameworks I had created were being marketed as proprietary methodologies he had developed. The documentation told a story that contradicted every narrative Michael had constructed about his business success and strategic expertise. According to his public presentations and client communications, he was a marketing genius who single-handedly developed innovative campaigns and strategic solutions. According to my files, he was someone who took credit for other people's work while contributing primarily networking and sales capabilities to the actual project development process. I started organizing this information into a comprehensive portfolio that demonstrated my actual contributions to Thompson Associates. Not for the purpose of confronting Michael or demanding recognition within the existing structure, but as proof of my professional capabilities and market value. If I was going to leave Thompson Associates, I wanted clear evidence of what I could offer to other employers or potential clients. The exercise of cataloging my achievements was both validating and infuriating. The scope of my contributions was much larger than I had fully appreciated while I was focused on day-to-day task completion. I had been responsible for major components of virtually every successful project the company had completed during my tenure. My research had informed strategic decisions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in client contracts. My client relationship management had prevented several account defections and facilitated significant contract expansions. Michael's characterization of me as administrative support was not just personally insulting, it was factually inaccurate. I was performing senior-level marketing consulting work while being compensated and credited at an entry-level scale. The value gap between my contributions and my recognition was enormous, and it had been sustained only through systematic misrepresentation of my role and capabilities. As I worked through my files, I began making notes about each client relationship and what I knew about their satisfaction levels, concerns, and future needs. Mrs. Williams had specifically told me that she trusted my strategic thinking more than any consultant she had worked with previously. Mr. Rodriguez had mentioned that I understood his restaurant business better than most marketing professionals he had encountered. The owners of Westfield Manufacturing had praised my thorough research and industry knowledge during our meetings. These weren't casual compliments from people trying to be polite. These were professional assessments from experienced business owners who had worked with multiple marketing consultants and could recognize competence when they encountered it. They valued my expertise, trusted my recommendations, and preferred my communication style to Michael's more aggressive sales approach. The realization that multiple clients preferred working with me rather than Michael was both empowering and strategically significant. Client loyalty in the marketing industry was often based on personal relationships and demonstrated competence rather than company brand recognition. If clients trusted my capabilities and appreciated my approach, those relationships might be transferable to a different professional context. I spent the afternoon researching business licensing requirements, professional liability insurance, and the administrative steps involved in establishing an independent marketing consultancy. The process was more straightforward than I had expected, with most requirements involving paperwork and fees rather than complex legal or regulatory hurdles. The financial analysis was encouraging. Based on the client contracts I had been managing, I could potentially generate sufficient revenue to support myself as an independent consultant while offering clients more personalized service and competitive pricing compared to larger firms. The overhead costs for a solo consultancy were minimal, essentially office space, technology, insurance, and marketing materials. More importantly, I would retain full credit and compensation for my work, rather than seeing my efforts attributed to someone else while receiving a fixed salary that bore no relationship to the value I was generating. The financial upside of independent practice was significant, but the professional autonomy was even more appealing. That evening, I created a simple website and business plan for what would become Thompson Strategic Marketing, a name I chose specifically to differentiate my services while acknowledging my professional development within the industry. The website was clean and professional, highlighting my experience, capabilities, and approach to client partnership without making any claims about my previous employer or colleagues. The business plan was conservative but realistic, projecting modest growth based on my existing client relationships and referral potential. I wasn't planning to compete directly with Thompson Associates for new business development. Instead, I would focus on providing specialized strategic consulting and research services to clients who valued analytical depth and personalized attention. The next morning, I returned to work with a sense of purpose and clarity that had been missing for months. I wasn't angry anymore, because anger implied that I still cared about Michael's opinion or treatment of me. I was focused on building something better than what I was leaving behind. Michael greeted me with his usual perfunctory concern about my health, and quickly moved into a discussion of pending projects and client deadlines. His assumption that I would seamlessly resume my previous role and responsibilities felt almost amusing now that I understood how temporarily I would be fulfilling those expectations. I spent the day handling my normal tasks with careful attention to detail, but I was also observing office dynamics with new awareness of what I would and wouldn't miss about working at Thompson Associates. The collaborative projects with David, Chen, the positive feedback from satisfied clients, the intellectual challenge of developing strategic solutions. These aspects of my work had been genuinely rewarding and had contributed to my professional development. But the systematic lack of recognition, the credit theft, the public humiliation, and the artificial limitations on my advancement opportunities had created an environment where I couldn't reach my full potential or receive appropriate compensation for my contributions. Michael's management style wasn't just personally demoralizing, it was professionally limiting in ways that would only become more pronounced over time. During lunch, I met with David Chen at a small cafe near our office. I had asked him to join me for what I described as an informal discussion about project management approaches, but I actually wanted to gauge his awareness of office dynamics and his perspective on my professional capabilities. David was more perceptive than I had realized. He had noticed the pattern of Michael taking credit for work that originated from other team members, and he had been particularly frustrated. By the way, my strategic insights were being rebranded as Michael's innovations. He respected my analytical abilities and had been puzzled by my limited advancement opportunities given the quality of my work and the positive client feedback I consistently received. "You're the most strategic thinker on our team," David told me over coffee. "Your research is thorough, your recommendations are practical, and clients clearly trust your expertise. I've never understood why Michael doesn't give you more visible leadership roles, or at least acknowledge your contributions during client presentations." His validation was professionally affirming, but it also confirmed what I had suspected about the broader team's awareness of my actual contributions versus my official recognition. Other colleagues had noticed the discrepancy between my work quality and my professional positioning, which meant Michael's treatment of me wasn't as subtle or acceptable as he might have believed. David's perspective also suggested that my departure would create a significant gap in the company's strategic capabilities, a gap that Michael might not be prepared to fill himself, given his limited involvement in the actual research and analysis, work that informed client recommendations. I didn't share my plans with David during that conversation, but I filed away his assessment of my capabilities for future reference. If I decided to pursue independent consulting, David's recommendation would carry substantial weight with potential clients who were familiar with Thompson Associates' work quality. That afternoon, Mrs. Williams called to follow up on our previous conversation about expanding her marketing budget. She asked to speak with me directly, rather than going through Michael's calendar, which had become her standard practice over the past few months. Her tone was warmer and more collaborative than it had been during our last interaction, but I could sense some underlying tension about the way that call had concluded. "Jessica, I wanted to continue our discussion about the New Year campaign strategy," she said. "Your insights about demographic targeting were exactly what I needed to hear, and I'd like to explore those recommendations in more detail." I provided the analysis she was requesting, while carefully avoiding any direct criticism of Michael's behavior during our previous call. But Mrs. Williams herself raised the issue in a way that revealed her discomfort with the professional dynamics she had witnessed. "I hope you don't mind my saying this," she said carefully, "but I was surprised by the way your colleague interrupted our conversation last week. I specifically requested this consultation because I value your expertise, and I want to make sure we can have productive discussions about my marketing needs." Her diplomatic phrasing conveyed a clear message. She had been offended by Michael's treatment of me and wanted to ensure that future interactions would be more respectful and collaborative. She was essentially asking me to protect her from having to deal with Michael's unprofessional behavior, while still accessing the strategic expertise she needed. I assured her that I understood her concerns and would make sure our future consultations focused on her business needs rather than internal office dynamics. But privately, I was documenting another instance of client dissatisfaction with Michael's management approach and another indication that clients preferred working with me directly. The conversation with Mrs. Williams clarified something important about the client relationships I had been building. These weren't just professional connections based on project collaboration. They were trust-based partnerships where clients valued my specific expertise and communication style. Mrs. Williams wasn't just satisfied with the services Thompson Associates provided. She was specifically satisfied with the services I provided and wanted to ensure continued access to my strategic thinking. This distinction was crucial for understanding my actual market position. I wasn't just an employee who happened to work on client accounts. I was a trusted advisor whose departure would potentially damage Thompson Associates' relationships with several important clients. The leverage this gave me was significant, but it also came with ethical responsibilities about how I managed the transition if I decided to leave. Over the following weeks, I continued performing my regular job responsibilities while quietly finalizing my plans for independent practice. I updated my professional portfolio, refined my business plan, completed the necessary licensing paperwork, and began reaching out to my network of industry contacts about my future availability for consulting projects. The responses to my networking inquiries were uniformly positive and often enthusiastic. Several contacts mentioned that they had been impressed by my work on behalf of Thompson Associates and would be interested in hiring me directly for strategic consulting projects. Others offered to refer potential clients who were seeking the kind of analytical depth and personalized attention that larger firms often couldn't provide. Michael remained completely unaware of my planning activities. His continued assumption that I was grateful for my job and committed to remaining at Thompson Associates indefinitely reflected the same blindness that had allowed him to believe he could humiliate me publicly without consequences. He saw my compliance with daily work requirements as evidence of contentment rather than professionalism during a transition period. The irony of his misperception wasn't lost on me. The same qualities that made me valuable as an employee, reliability, discretion, strategic thinking, and attention to detail, were also making me effective at planning my departure without alerting him to potential problems. I was using the skills he had consistently undervalued to create a solution he would never see coming. During this planning period, I also began having more intentional conversations with clients about their long-term marketing needs and satisfaction with current service levels. These discussions were framed as routine account management check-ins, but they provided valuable intelligence about client priorities, concerns, and openness to alternative service arrangements. The pattern that emerged from these conversations was clear and consistent. Clients appreciated the strategic depth and analytical rigor I brought to their projects, but they were often frustrated by communication delays, scheduling difficulties, and what they perceived as Thompson Associates' limited availability for ongoing consultation and support. Several clients mentioned that they would prefer more direct access to the strategic thinking behind their campaigns, rather than having to communicate through multiple layers of account management. Others expressed interest in more frequent consultation, opportunities, and more flexible project arrangements than were typically available through larger marketing firms. These client preferences aligned perfectly with the service model I was developing for my independent practice. I could offer more direct communication, more flexible scheduling, more personalized attention, and more competitive pricing than they were receiving through Thompson Associates. The value proposition was compelling for clients and financially attractive for me. The final element of my preparation involved securing professional references and recommendations that would support my transition to independent practice. David Chen agreed to provide a recommendation that highlighted my strategic capabilities and project management skills. Several clients offered to serve as references for my analytical abilities and client service approach. Mrs. Williams went further than a simple reference offer. During one of our routine consultation calls, she mentioned that she had been considering working with an independent consultant who could provide more focused attention to her business development needs than she was receiving through traditional agency relationships. "If you ever decide to pursue independent consulting," she said meaningfully, "I would be very interested in discussing a retainer arrangement. You understand my business better than any marketing professional I've worked with, and I trust your strategic recommendations completely." Her offer wasn't just professional validation, it was financial security for my transition period. A retainer arrangement with Pacific Fitness Studios would provide stable monthly income while I built my client base and established my reputation as an independent consultant. 3 months after Michael called me a stupid servant for the third time, I was ready to give him what he truly deserved. Not revenge, not retaliation, not public confrontation or dramatic resignation scenes. Something much more powerful and permanent than temporary satisfaction. I was ready to give him the consequences of his choices. He had chosen to treat a valuable employee with contempt and cruelty. He had chosen to steal credit for work he didn't do while humiliating the person who actually did it. He had chosen to prioritize his ego over his business relationships and professional reputation. Now he would experience the natural results of those choices. The loss of a senior-level employee whose contributions he had systematically undervalued. The potential loss of client relationships that were based more on personal trust than company loyalty. The operational challenges of replacing strategic capabilities he had never bothered to understand or acknowledge. Michael thought I was a stupid servant who didn't understand business strategy. He was about to discover that this servant had learned enough about his business, his clients, and his vulnerabilities to walk away with the foundation of everything he had built while he wasn't paying attention. The revolution had been silent because he had never bothered to listen. But the results would be loud enough that he would never forget the sound of a door closing on his own arrogance and cruelty. The morning I submitted my resignation letter, the sun was shining through the windows of Thompson Associates, with the kind of clarity that makes everything look sharp and newly defined. I had chosen a Monday morning deliberately, wanting to start the week with the clean break that would give Michael maximum time to process what was happening and begin understanding the scope of what he was losing. I printed the letter on company letterhead a small irony that amused me as I walked into Michael's office at exactly 9 o'clock. He was reviewing weekend emails with his usual Monday morning intensity, coffee cups steaming beside his keyboard, tie perfectly knotted despite the early hour. He looked up with the casual expectation of routine business discussion, probably assuming I was bringing him project updates or scheduling requests. "I have something for you," I said, placing the envelope on his desk with the same professional courtesy I had maintained throughout my employment. The weight of the moment felt enormous to me, but to Michael, it was just another piece of paperwork requiring his attention. He opened the envelope with distracted efficiency, scanning the first few lines before his expression shifted from casual interest to confused surprise. I watched his face as he read the formal notification that my employment with Thompson Associates would terminate in 2 weeks, effective immediately following the completion of current project obligations. "What is this?" he asked, looking up from the letter with genuine bewilderment. "Are you quitting?" The question revealed everything about how he perceived our professional relationship. Despite months of systematic humiliation and public dismissal of my capabilities, he was genuinely surprised that I might choose to leave. In his mind, I was lucky to have this job, grateful for the opportunity he had provided, and permanently committed to accepting whatever treatment he chose to offer. "I'm resigning," I confirmed, keeping my voice steady and professional. "My last day will be Friday, December 15th. I'll ensure all current projects are properly documented and transferred before my departure." Michael stared at the letter, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more acceptable. "But why?" he asked. "Is this about money? Because we can discuss a raise during your next performance review." The offer of a potential salary increase, delivered after months of systematic devaluation, was both insulting and revealing. Michael apparently believed that my decision to leave was based on compensation rather than respect, that financial incentives could resolve the fundamental problems in our working relationship. "This isn't about money," I replied calmly. "I've decided to pursue other opportunities that are better aligned with my professional goals and capabilities." His confusion deepened, as if the concept of me having professional goals beyond serving his needs was genuinely foreign to him. "What other opportunities?" he asked. "Are you going to work for a competitor?" The question revealed his primary concern, not the loss of my contributions to Thompson Associates, but the possibility that those contributions might benefit a rival firm. Even in this moment, he was thinking about business competition rather than the human cost of his behavior or the reasons behind my decision. "I'm starting my own consulting practice," I said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I'll be providing strategic marketing services to small and medium-sized businesses." The silence that followed was profound and telling. Michael's expression shifted through several distinct phases: surprise, calculation, and then something that looked like the beginning of real concern. For the first time since I had known him, he seemed to be genuinely processing the implications of losing me, rather than simply assuming I would always be available to support his business needs. "You can't do that," he said finally, his voice carrying a note of authority that sounded hollow in the context of my resignation. "You signed a non-compete agreement when you started here." I had been expecting this response and had prepared for it carefully. "I reviewed my employment contract thoroughly," I replied. "The non-compete clause specifically prohibits me from soliciting Thompson Associates clients for a period of 6 months. It doesn't prohibit me from starting an independent consulting practice or accepting business from clients who choose to contact me directly." The distinction was legally significant and strategically important. I had no intention of actively soliciting Michael's clients, but I also had no obligation to refuse their business if they chose to seek my services independently. The non-compete agreement had been drafted to prevent employee poaching of existing accounts, not to prevent former employees from accepting unsolicited business opportunities. Michael's face was reddening as he processed the implications of what I was telling him. "This is completely unethical," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I gave you this job when you needed it. I trained you, supported your development, and trusted you with confidential client information, and now you're using everything you learned here to compete against me." His characterization of our relationship was so fundamentally inaccurate that I almost laughed. He had given me a job, yes, but he had consistently undermined my development, stolen credit for my work, and humiliated me publicly whenever he felt the need to assert dominance. The training and support he claimed to have provided had actually come from my own research, learning, and relationship-building efforts. "I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had here," I said, maintaining my professional tone despite his increasingly agitated demeanor. "But I'm not competing against Thompson Associates. I'm offering specialized services to a different market segment." This was technically true, though I suspected Michael would discover soon enough that market segments in the marketing industry were more fluid than he might prefer. Small and medium-sized businesses included many of the clients currently served by Thompson Associates, and those clients would make their own decisions about where to purchase their marketing services. "You can't just walk away like this," Michael continued, his voice now carrying a note of desperation that I found both satisfying and pathetic. "We have projects in progress, client commitments, deadlines to meet. You're leaving me in an impossible position." The irony of his concern about being left in an impossible position was particularly rich, given how systematically he had worked to make my own position impossible through public humiliation and professional marginalization. But I responded to his practical concerns rather than his emotional appeals. "I'm providing 2 weeks' notice, which exceeds the minimum requirement in my contract," I pointed out. "I'll spend this time documenting all current projects and preparing detailed transition materials for whoever takes over my responsibilities." Michael seemed to realize that appeals to loyalty or professional obligation weren't going to change my decision, so he shifted to a more threatening approach. "If you think you can just steal my clients and use my business strategies to compete against me, you're going to be very disappointed," he said. "I have resources and connections that you'll never be able to match." His assumption that my success would depend on stealing his clients and strategies revealed how little he understood about my actual capabilities and market position. I had been developing my own approaches to strategic analysis and client relationship management, approaches that were often more effective than the methods used by Thompson Associates. My value to clients wasn't based on Michael's business strategies. It was based on my own expertise and the trust I had built through consistently excellent work. "I'm confident in my ability to build a successful practice based on my own capabilities and client relationships," I replied. "I wish you continued success with Thompson Associates." The conversation ended with awkward formality, both of us understanding that our professional relationship had fundamentally changed, but neither willing to acknowledge the personal animosity that had driven this transition. Michael returned to his desk with the resignation letter, and I returned to mine to begin the process of documenting everything he would need to know about managing the accounts I was leaving behind. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained complete professionalism while preparing the most comprehensive transition documentation in corporate history. Every client account received a detailed file containing project history, strategic analysis, contact preferences, communication patterns, and recommendations for future service delivery. Every ongoing project received a timeline, resource requirements, methodology notes, and quality control guidelines. I wasn't doing this out of loyalty to Michael or concern for Thompson Associates' continued success. I was doing it to protect my own professional reputation and ensure that clients wouldn't suffer unnecessarily during the transition period. The quality of my departure process would reflect on my character and competence, and I wanted that reflection to be entirely positive. The reaction from colleagues was mixed and revealing. David Chen expressed genuine regret about my departure and asked if there were any changes to working conditions that might convince me to stay. Other team members seemed surprised, but not particularly concerned, suggesting that Michael had successfully convinced them that my contributions were less significant than they actually were. The reaction from clients was more dramatic and professionally validating. Mrs. Williams called within hours of receiving my transition documentation to express her disappointment and ask about my future availability for consulting work. Mr. Rodriguez from the restaurant group sent an email asking if Thompson Associates would be able to maintain the same level of strategic analysis and industry expertise after my departure. Several other clients made similar inquiries, politely, but pointedly questioning whether the firm would be able to continue providing the same quality of service without my involvement. Their concerns were diplomatically expressed, but the underlying message was clear. They had been working with me rather than with Thompson Associates, and they were worried about the continuity of their marketing support. Michael's growing awareness of these client concerns was evident in his increasingly frequent visits to my desk during my final weeks. He would ask detailed questions about client preferences, project methodologies, and strategic frameworks as if he were trying to absorb years of accumulated knowledge in a matter of days. His sudden interest in understanding my work was both gratifying and pathetic. For months, he had dismissed my contributions as administrative support that anyone could provide. Now, faced with the prospect of actually providing those services himself, he was discovering that the work required expertise and relationship management skills he had never bothered to develop. "How do you handle Mrs. Williams when she gets frustrated with campaign performance?" he asked during one of these sessions. "She seemed upset during our last call, and I'm not sure what she expects from us." The question revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of client relationship management. Mrs. Williams wasn't getting frustrated with campaign performance. She was getting frustrated with his communication style and his lack of detailed knowledge about her business needs. She preferred working with me because I listened to her concerns, provided thorough analysis, and offered practical solutions rather than generic marketing advice. "Mrs. Williams values detailed analysis and transparent communication," I replied, diplomatically. "She likes to understand the reasoning behind strategic recommendations and appreciate when her specific business challenges are acknowledged and addressed." Michael nodded as if this were profound insight rather than basic client service principles. His notes about my responses suggested he was trying to create a manual for managing relationships he had never really understood in the first place. Similar conversations occurred regarding other client accounts, each revealing the gap between Michael's perception of his client relationships and the reality of what those clients actually valued about working with Thompson Associates. He had been taking credit for successful account management while remaining largely ignorant of what made those accounts successful. As my departure date approached, the requests for documentation and explanation became more urgent and detailed. Michael wanted step-by-step instructions for maintaining client satisfaction, managing project timelines, and developing strategic recommendations that would meet client expectations for analytical depth and practical applicability. "Maybe we should discuss extending your notice period," he suggested during our final week, "just to ensure a smooth transition and give us more time to transfer your knowledge to other team members." The offer was tempting from a financial perspective, but I declined for strategic reasons. Extending my departure would only delay the inevitable adjustment period that Thompson Associates would need to undergo, and it might create confusion among clients about my availability for independent consulting work. "I believe 2 weeks is sufficient for transferring essential information," I replied. "The documentation I've prepared should provide everything needed for continuity of client service." Michael's expression suggested he disagreed with my assessment, but he didn't push the issue further. Perhaps he was beginning to understand that I was leaving because I wanted to leave, not because of circumstances that could be negotiated or incentives that could be offered. My final day at Thompson Associates was surprisingly emotional, though not in the way I had expected. I felt no sadness about leaving Michael or the toxic dynamics he had created, but I did feel genuine regret about leaving David Chen and the collaborative relationships we had built. I would miss the intellectual stimulation of working with talented colleagues on complex strategic challenges. David and I had lunch together on my last day, and he expressed both personal and professional disappointment about my departure. "You're the best strategic thinker we've had here," he told me honestly. "Michael doesn't understand what he's losing, but the rest of us do." His validation meant more to me than any recognition I had received from Michael throughout my employment. David understood the quality of my work because he had collaborated with me on projects where my contributions were visible and measurable. His respect was based on demonstrated competence rather than hierarchical authority. "If you ever need freelance strategic support for any of your projects," I offered, "please don't hesitate to contact me. I'd be happy to work with you again in a different capacity." David smiled and promised to keep my contact information for future reference. The conversation felt like the beginning of a professional relationship that might outlast my employment at Thompson Associates, a possibility that excited me more than any aspect of my current position. My final interaction with Michael was brief and formal. He thanked me for my service to the company and wished me success in my future endeavors. The words were appropriate, but delivered without warmth or genuine sentiment. We both understood that this was a business transaction concluding rather than a personal relationship ending. I cleaned out my desk methodically, taking only personal items and leaving behind all materials related to Thompson Associates projects and clients. My computer files had been transferred to company servers, my office keys returned to human resources, and my access credentials deactivated. The administrative aspects of departure were efficient and unremarkable. But walking out of that office for the last time felt like emerging from underwater after holding my breath for months. The weight of constant vigilance, professional diminishment, and systematic disrespect lifted from my shoulders as the elevator doors closed behind me. I was free to be myself again, to value my own contributions, and to build something that reflected my actual capabilities rather than someone else's limitations. The first few weeks of independent consulting were challenging but exhilarating. I worked from my studio apartment initially, using my kitchen table as a desk and conducting client meetings at local coffee shops or their offices. The overhead was minimal. The flexibility was enormous, and the sense of ownership over my work was deeply satisfying. Mrs. Williams became my first official client, signing a retainer agreement that provided monthly consulting services for strategic planning and campaign development. Her enthusiasm about working with me directly was both professionally validating and financially stabilizing during my transition period. "I'm so relieved to be working with you again," she told me during our first independent consultation. "The service quality at Thompson Associates has declined significantly since you left, and I was worried about finding someone who understood my business as well as you do." Her feedback about Thompson Associates' declining service quality was consistent with reports I was hearing from other former clients. Several had mentioned communication delays, reduced analytical depth, and generic recommendations that didn't reflect understanding of their specific business challenges. Mr. Rodriguez contacted me directly about handling the marketing strategy for his restaurant group's expansion into new markets. His decision to leave Thompson Associates was based on their inability to provide the detailed industry analysis and localized market research that his expansion plans required. Michael kept promising the same level of strategic support you used to provide, he explained. But it became clear that he didn't actually understand how to deliver that kind of analysis himself. Within 3 months, I had signed consulting agreements with 4 former Thompson Associates clients and attracted 3 new clients through referrals and networking. The revenue from these relationships exceeded my previous salary, while requiring fewer hours and providing much greater professional satisfaction. The work itself was more rewarding than anything I had experienced at Thompson Associates. Clients valued my input, implemented my recommendations, and provided feedback that helped me refine my approach and develop specialized expertise in several industry sectors. I was building genuine partnerships based on mutual respect and demonstrated results. 6 months after leaving Thompson Associates, I learned through industry contacts that the firm was struggling with client retention and had lost several major accounts. Michael had hired 2 different people to replace me, but neither had been able to maintain the analytical standards or client relationships that had characterized my work. David Chen left Thompson Associates to join a larger marketing firm about 8 months after my departure. During our conversation about his transition, he mentioned that the loss of institutional knowledge and client relationships following my resignation had created ongoing operational challenges that Michael had never fully addressed. He never understood that your value wasn't just in completing tasks, David observed. It was in the relationships you built and the expertise you developed. Those things can't be replaced by hiring someone with similar job titles. The validation was satisfying, but more importantly, it confirmed my decision to leave and pursue independent practice. I had been right about my own capabilities and market value, right about the transferability of client relationships, and right about the possibility of building something better than what I was leaving behind. A year after my departure, Thompson Strategic Marketing had grown into a small but successful consultancy with 8 regular clients and a waiting list for new engagements. I had hired a part-time administrative assistant and was considering expanding into additional service areas based on client demand and market opportunities. The business success was gratifying, but the personal satisfaction was even more meaningful. I was working with clients who valued my expertise, respected my professional judgment, and compensated me fairly for the value I provided. Every project was an opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities rather than hide them. Michael had taught me exactly what I didn't want from my professional life: systematic diminishment, stolen credit, public humiliation, and artificial limitations on my growth and recognition. In trying to keep me small, he had inadvertently shown me how large I could become when freed from his limitations and expectations. The stupid servant he had tried to create was actually a strategic thinker with the skills and relationships necessary to build a successful independent practice. His attempts to diminish me had only clarified my actual value and motivated me to pursue opportunities that better reflected my capabilities. The 3 times he called me a servant weren't moments of weakness or victimization in my story. They were moments of clarity that ultimately led to empowerment and independence. His cruelty had been the catalyst for my transformation from undervalued employee to successful entrepreneur. I gave him exactly what he deserved: the natural consequences of his choices to value ego over talent, dominance over collaboration, and short-term control over long-term success. He lost a valuable employee, damaged client relationships, and learned that treating people with cruelty and disrespect has costs that extend far beyond the immediate satisfaction of asserting authority. To every woman who has been called stupid, dismissed as a servant, or told to know her place, your value isn't determined by someone else's inability to recognize it. Your capabilities aren't limited by someone else's need to feel superior. Your future isn't constrained by someone else's failure to appreciate what you bring to the table. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated is to quietly build something so successful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is living well enough that you forget they ever mattered. Sometimes giving people what they deserve means simply walking away and letting them experience the consequences of losing someone they never deserved in the first place. Michael wanted a servant who would accept humiliation without question. Instead, he got a lesson in what happens when you underestimate someone who has been paying attention, learning everything, and quietly preparing for the day when they choose themselves over your comfort. That day changed both of our lives forever. The difference is, I changed mine intentionally. 3 years after I walked out of Thompson Associates, I received an invitation that made me pause in the middle of reading my morning emails. The Riverside Business Association was hosting their annual Excellence in Marketing Awards ceremony, and Thompson Strategic Marketing had been nominated for Small Business Marketing Firm of the Year. The nomination itself was thrilling, but what caught my attention was the note at the bottom of the invitation mentioning that Michael Thompson from Thompson Associates would be presenting one of the awards. I hadn't seen Michael since the day I left his company, though I had heard about him occasionally through industry connections and mutual acquaintances. The reports were consistent and not particularly surprising. Thompson Associates had struggled significantly after my departure, losing several major clients and failing to maintain the quality standards that had previously distinguished their work in the local market. David Chen had left about a year after I did, joining a larger firm in Los Angeles, where his creative talents were better appreciated and more appropriately compensated. He had become a valuable referral source for my business, sending me clients who needed specialized strategic consulting that larger agencies couldn't provide with their standardized service models. Other former colleagues had also moved on to different opportunities, suggesting that the problems at Thompson Associates extended beyond my individual experience and reflected broader issues with company culture and management philosophy. The pattern of departures had created a reputation problem that made it difficult for Michael to attract and retain quality employees. My own business had grown beyond anything I had imagined when I first started working from my kitchen table. Thompson Strategic Marketing now occupied a small office in downtown Riverside, employed 3 full-time consultants and 2 part-time administrative staff, and served over 30 clients across various industries. We had developed specialized expertise in restaurant marketing, fitness industry promotion, and small business digital strategy. The growth had been organic and sustainable, built on referrals from satisfied clients and word-of-mouth recommendations from industry professionals who appreciated our analytical approach and personalized service model. Unlike larger marketing firms that relied on standardized packages and high-volume client processing, we focused on developing deep understanding of each client's business and creating customized strategies that addressed their specific challenges and opportunities. Our client retention rate was over 90%, and our project success rate had earned recognition from the California Small Business Development Association and the Riverside Chamber of Commerce. The awards and recognition were professionally validating, but more importantly, they reflected the quality of work that was possible when employees were valued, credited appropriately, and given opportunities to utilize their full capabilities. I decided to attend the awards ceremony, partly out of curiosity about seeing Michael again, but primarily because the nomination represented an important milestone for my business and my team. We had worked hard to build something meaningful and successful, and the recognition deserved to be celebrated regardless of any personal history that might complicate the evening. The ceremony was held at the Riverside Convention Center, with about 300 local business owners, marketing professionals, and community leaders in attendance. I arrived with Sarah Martinez, who had joined my firm 18 months earlier after leaving a larger agency where she felt creatively constrained and professionally undervalued. Sarah had become an invaluable team member and close friend, someone who understood the importance of building a workplace culture based on mutual respect and collaborative excellence. The evening began with cocktails and networking, giving me an opportunity to reconnect with colleagues and clients I hadn't seen in several months. The conversations were energizing and professionally affirming, with several people congratulating me on the nomination and expressing interest in potential collaboration opportunities. About halfway through the cocktail hour, I saw Michael across the room, standing near the registration table with a drink in his hand and an expression that suggested he was working harder than usual to project confidence and success. He had gained some weight and looked older than the 3 years that had passed, with gray showing at his temples and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during my employment. He was talking to a small group of people I didn't recognize, gesturing animatedly in a way that suggested he was telling a story meant to impress his audience. His suit was expensive and well-fitted, his posture was straight and authoritative, but there was something about his demeanor that seemed forced and slightly desperate. I wasn't planning to approach him, but he noticed me across the room and began walking in my direction with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he had something specific he wanted to say. I braced myself for what might be an uncomfortable conversation, but I was curious about his perspective on the changes that had occurred since my departure. "Jessica," he said as he reached me, extending his hand with a smile that looked genuine, but felt calculated. "I heard about your nomination tonight. Congratulations on your success." I shook his hand and thanked him politely, noting that his grip was firmer than necessary and held longer than appropriate, as if he were trying to establish dominance through physical contact. "Thank you, Michael. I hope you're doing well." "Oh, absolutely," he replied with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "Thompson Associates is stronger than ever. We've expanded our service offerings and brought in some really talented people to help us serve our growing client base." His description of company growth contradicted everything I had heard through industry channels, but I didn't challenge his narrative. If he needed to present a version of reality that protected his ego and professional reputation, that was his choice and not my concern. "That's wonderful to hear," I said diplomatically. "I'm glad things are going well for you." Michael's expression shifted slightly, as if he were trying to decide whether to continue with pleasantries or address more substantial issues. After a moment of awkward silence, he chose directness over diplomacy. "You know, I have to admit, I was surprised when you left," he said, his tone becoming more serious and personal. "I thought we had a good working relationship, and I believed you were happy with your role at the company." His characterization of our working relationship as good was so disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. The systematic humiliation, credit theft, and public dismissal of my capabilities had apparently been forgotten or reframed in his memory as normal professional interactions. "I learned a lot during my time at Thompson Associates," I replied, carefully avoiding direct criticism while acknowledging that our perspectives on my experience were significantly different. "I hope there were no hard feelings about anything that happened," Michael continued, apparently oblivious to the irony of his concern about hard feelings given his treatment of me. "Sometimes business relationships can become complicated, and I wouldn't want any misunderstandings to affect your memories of working with us." His suggestion that our problems had been based on misunderstandings rather than his deliberate behavior revealed either genuine ignorance of his actions or calculated revisionism designed to protect his self-image. Either way, it demonstrated that he hadn't learned anything meaningful from the experience of losing a valuable employee and damaging client relationships. "I don't have any hard feelings," I said honestly. "Leaving Thompson Associates was the best decision I could have made for my professional development and personal satisfaction." Michael's face darkened slightly at my implication that leaving his company had been beneficial rather than regrettable. His ego apparently couldn't tolerate the suggestion that his management had been limiting my potential rather than developing it. "Well, I'm sure running your own business has its challenges," he said with a tone that suggested he hoped those challenges were significant and ongoing. "The overhead costs, administrative responsibilities, and pressure of client acquisition can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to managing all aspects of business operations." His assumption that I was struggling with the complexities of business ownership was both patronizing and revealing. He seemed unable to imagine that I might be thriving in an environment where I received full credit for my work and direct compensation for the value I created. "I've been fortunate to work with excellent clients and build a strong team," I replied. "The challenges have been manageable, and the rewards have exceeded my expectations." Before Michael could respond, the ceremony organizers announced that dinner would be served and guests should find their assigned tables. I was relieved to have a reason to end our conversation, which had become increasingly uncomfortable as Michael's true feelings about my success became apparent. My table included several other small business owners, marketing professionals, and community leaders who were genuinely interested in discussing industry trends, business development, strategies, and collaborative opportunities. The conversations were intellectually stimulating and professionally valuable, reminding me of how much I enjoyed working with people who valued expertise and appreciated diverse perspectives. During dinner, I noticed Michael at a table near the front of the room, presumably positioned there because of his role as an award presenter. He was engaged in animated conversation with his table mates, but his body language suggested tension, and his frequent glances toward other tables implied he was monitoring the room's social dynamics rather than focusing on his immediate companions. The awards presentation began after dinner, with categories ranging from innovative advertising campaigns to outstanding client service recognition. Each award was presented by a local business leader, with brief speeches about the importance of marketing excellence and the value of creative problem-solving in competitive markets. When Michael's turn came to present the award for Outstanding Digital Marketing Campaign, his introduction was professionally delivered but lacked the warmth and authenticity that had characterized other presenters' remarks. He spoke about the importance of embracing new technologies and adapting to changing consumer behaviors, but his comments felt generic and scripted rather than informed by genuine expertise or experience. The award recipient was a young woman who had developed an innovative social media campaign for a local nonprofit organization. Her acceptance speech was gracious and inspiring, emphasizing the collaborative nature of successful marketing and the importance of understanding client missions and values. Her approach to strategic thinking and client partnership sounded remarkably similar to the methodology I had developed during my consulting practice. Finally, the moment arrived for my category, Small Business Marketing Firm of the Year, the FEI. Presenter was Mrs. Patricia Williams, whose fitness studios had become one of my most successful and long-standing client relationships. I hadn't realized she would be presenting this particular award, and her presence at the podium felt like a wonderful surprise and validation. The nominees for Small Business Marketing Firm of the Year represent the best of what our local marketing community has to offer, Mrs. Williams began. These firms demonstrate excellence in strategic thinking, client service, and measurable results. They understand that successful marketing isn't about flashy presentations or generic solutions. It's about understanding each client's unique challenges and developing customized approaches that deliver real business value. As she read the list of nominees, including Thompson Strategic Marketing, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude for the team we had built and the relationships we had developed. Regardless of whether we won the award, the nomination itself represented recognition from our peers and clients that our approach was creating meaningful value in the marketplace. The winner of this year's Small Business Marketing Firm of the Year award, Mrs. Williams announced, is Thompson Strategic Marketing, led by Jessica Thompson. The applause was generous and sustained, and I felt overwhelmed by the combination of professional recognition and personal satisfaction. As I walked to the podium, I caught sight of Michael's expression, a mixture of surprise, frustration, and what looked like genuine confusion about how someone he had dismissed as a servant could achieve this level of recognition and success. My acceptance speech focused on thanking my team, acknowledging our clients' trust and partnership, and emphasizing the importance of creating workplace cultures where everyone's contributions are valued and recognized. I didn't mention Thompson Associates or my previous employment experiences, but I spoke about the satisfaction of building something based on mutual respect and collaborative excellence. Success in marketing, like success in any field, comes from understanding that great results are achieved through great relationships, I said, looking out at the audience of colleagues and clients who had supported my journey. When we value each other's expertise, credit each other's contributions, and create environments where everyone can do their best work, amazing things become possible. The applause following my speech was warm and enthusiastic, and several people approached me afterward to offer congratulations and discuss potential collaboration opportunities. The evening had become a celebration not just of my business success, but of the principles and values that had guided our approach to client service and team development. As the ceremony concluded and guests began leaving, Michael approached me one final time. His demeanor was different now, less confident, more thoughtful, and perhaps more honest than it had been during our earlier conversation. "Congratulations on your award," he said, and this time his words seemed genuine rather than perfunctory. "I have to admit, I didn't expect to see you achieve this level of success so quickly." His admission of surprise was revealing and somewhat satisfying. The woman he had characterized as a stupid servant had built something that earned recognition from industry peers and community leaders. The employee he had systematically diminished had created a business that exemplified the excellence and innovation he claimed to value. "Thank you," I replied simply, not feeling the need to elaborate on my journey or explain how his treatment had motivated my determination to succeed. Michael hesitated for a moment, as if he were considering whether to say something more personal or meaningful. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter and less defensive than before. "I think I may have made some mistakes in how I managed our working relationship," he said, the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive from someone whose ego made genuine accountability nearly impossible. "We all make mistakes," I replied diplomatically, offering him the grace of accepting his acknowledgement without requiring a more complete reckoning with his behavior. "I hope you'll remember some of the positive aspects of your time at Thompson and Associates," he continued, apparently still hoping to reframe our professional relationship in terms that preserved his self-image. "I remember everything that was important," I said, which was true, but not in the way he probably hoped. I remembered the systematic disrespect that had motivated my departure, the stolen credit that had clarified my value, and the public humiliation that had strengthened my resolve to build something better. Michael nodded and extended his hand once more, this time with a handshake that felt like a genuine conclusion to our professional relationship, rather than an attempt to establish dominance. We parted ways in the parking lot, walking toward our respective cars and our very different professional futures. Driving home that night with my award in the passenger seat, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from his administrative assistant to recognized business owner. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate, but it had been authentic and sustainable because it was built on genuine capability rather than artificial positioning. 3 years earlier, Michael had called me a stupid servant and told me to know my place. Tonight, I had received industry recognition for building exactly the kind of business he claimed to lead, one based on strategic excellence, client partnership, and measurable results. The irony was perfect, and the satisfaction was complete. But more importantly, I had proven to myself and others that success isn't determined by someone else's opinion of your worth. It's determined by your willingness to recognize your own value, develop your own capabilities, and create opportunities that reflect your actual potential rather than someone else's limitations. The stupid servant had become the award-winning entrepreneur. The woman who was told to know her place had created her own place and invited others to join her there. The employee who was systematically diminished had built something that elevated everyone who chose to be part of it. That transformation wasn't revenge against Michael. It was freedom from him. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. It wasn't about getting what he deserved. It was about creating what I deserved. And what I deserved was exactly what I had built: a business based on respect, recognition, and results. A team that valued collaboration over domination. A reputation earned through competence rather than inherited through position. A life where my worth wasn't determined by someone else's need to feel superior. Michael had taught me what I didn't want, and in doing so, he had clarified exactly what I did want. For that unintentional gift, I was almost grateful. Almost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass. These up. Just click and check them out.